Hello, everybody. So we are starting module 4 today, which means we're almost halfway through the class. These go quickly. Got a few things to cover today. I was going to talk about probability because that was originally scheduled in the module 3 quiz, but when I got back from Indianapolis on Friday, I dropped off the keys for the school's car and then thought, oh, okay, I got to go by my office and grab the folder with my notes. And I walked in my office and looked around and said, well, I guess I don't need anything, and then walked back out to the car and left. So I forgot my notes on probability, and that's even more accentuated than the Newtonian physics last week. At one point when I was working on my bachelor's, I was doing dual majors in math and physics, and I ran out of financial aid with like one math class left to go, and a couple of physics classes left to go. So I have to go back and get that degree sometime. But I've gone up to like 400 level physics classes. That's why last week when we went over physics, I had the notes in my hand the whole time. And on probability and stochastic processes, really, I've gone up to like 600 level classes. And I'm probably going to do my graduate thesis or my next graduate thesis on stochastic processes and probability. So I don't want to do the probability lecture without the notes in my hand because I spent a lot of time trying to make sure it was back at introduction level, and I didn't get too carried away with it. So that quiz will probably be pushed back to next week even. The other one was storytelling, and those notes I borrowed some notes from the person who teaches creative writing at the Sellersburg campus, which thank you all for all joining on Zoom today. With the total eclipse, the state of Indiana is a giant tourist trap right now. So all of the Ivy Techs shut down for today to accommodate that, or didn't shut down. Campuses stayed closed, and we're just doing everything virtual. But the state is a giant tourist trap, so I wasn't sure how many people were going to be showing up. From what I heard, it seems like Terre Haute has definitely the best slogan as far as tourist trap goes, and theme for the event and stuff. When I looked at the clock, it looked like it would be around our area in southern Indiana, the amount we're getting right about the time we would be finishing up. So should be able to see it, but if it happens in your area and you want to go see the eclipse, feel free to go see it. The Zoom call is being recorded as always. Somebody unmuted, or did you ask a question? Oh, okay. I see all few things. If you have any questions, just unmute and ask a question. That was probably background noise I heard though. Yeah, so we'll go over storytelling. I like to use those notes from creative writing class because, well, like physics and probability and all those other pieces in the art, it helps to show how game development is different than, say, our other software development courses. It really does take bits and pieces from all these different fields and ties them together nicely. I also have my method for a method I want to share with you for writing stories. It's more for when you get stuck, you don't have an idea and just have to spit something out. When was it? It was years ago. I spent several years writing novels. A publishing company out of Baltimore flipped the bill, bought an agent and all that, but people buy books from authors they know about. So my stuff just filled space nicely on shelves for a few years until the contracts expired and probably got recycled after that. But during that time that I was writing, I spent 35 or 40 hours a week writing, no matter what. And sometimes the story is just flowing out. And when that happens, you don't want to stop it. You just do your best to not get in the way of the story flowing out on its own. But then other times it's just the ebb and flow of creativity. The story just doesn't want to come out, but we still have to force out a story. So I have some tips for when that happens. And then some stuff in Godot that will be necessary for your upcoming project. Make sure we cover those. How to change between scenes. That fits nicely with storytelling because in video games, a lot of the story comes through cutscenes. So we'll need to have some cutscenes. And then we'll take a look at signals, which is how the nodes communicate with each other. So those last two things will be in actually doing stuff in the Godot engine. So it'll be a little bit shorter today. Then on Wednesday, we'll probably only go for about an hour and 15 minutes. I'll be back in the classroom like normal, but let me write his name down. I'll be back in the classroom on Wednesday, but only for like an hour and 15 minutes. And then I have to go to another summit this weekend, or the last half of this week, or get to go. I shouldn't say have to go. I'm very, very excited about it. But this one, there's a lot more people. The one last week was just School of IT faculty. So we all kind of drove ourselves. But the one this week is an overall Ivy Tech one. So there's carpools. There's like 3 vehicles going from Sellersburg to French Lick. So I'm in one of those, and the person in the vehicle I'm driving the vehicle I'm in sent out a message, said with time we're leaving, which is well before our class is scheduled to end. So it'll only be about an hour or so on Wednesday. Probably doing some stuff in Godot. I haven't decided completely I have a long list of things to cover for the class. I haven't figured out for certain what we're going to do in that hour, but I'll have something planned out by Wednesday. So I guess first off, let's talk about storytelling, because that's a very important part of game development. It's really what we're doing. That guides the player. There's the entertainment aspect, the art, just like the artistic aspect. It brings everything together, explains why the particular graphics that we use in our game are where they are. It guides the player, tells them what to do, right? If it's an alien invasion game, then the player knows that from the story that's happening that they should be out there fighting aliens or something like that. Or a very common thing, NPCs in the game, as the story unravels for the player, the NPCs tell the player what the next chapter of the story is, where they need to go next, what they need to do, and then slowly unveil the story to it. A few games have got by without a story. Like Tetris didn't really have a story to it, but all of the Tetris knockoffs had to have a story still. It's a very important thing. And it's really what we're doing with the game. This video games are just the next step in something that comes very naturally for humans, both creating them and enjoying them. Is storytelling, going back as long as language, and humans have told each other stories. In prehistory, that's how knowledge was passed around before we invented writing, and started writing stories down. Then eventually film and animation came along, had movies, and video games are kind of the next step in that progression on something that just seems like a natural tendency of humanity. Both sides, to create the story and to enjoy the story that's being told. So we want to make sure and talk about this some. So I'm going to start with the notes from one of the more traditional storytelling styles, which would be writing it like English. Oh, I went to spreadsheets for some reason. I wanted docs. Here we go. So I borrowed these from one of the English professors that regularly teaches creative writing at our campus, and just the things that we want to think about. So, first thing that we jump into is the overall plot. So, what's the main event of the story? Right? That's like saying this is a alien invasion story. Um, this is a plumber in some strange world built around mushrooms and turtles. Uh, that big broad spectrum thing. That's what we've been doing in the discussion boards, which it looks like there's been some great posts on there. I was sharing that with other people at the IT Summit last week, that those discussion boards for this class seem to be some of the best discussion boards I've ever had. At least one person has already gone all the way through and done all of them. So feel free to work ahead. I usually won't grade things until after the due date. Sometimes I'll grade a little bit early, but I don't grade if only one person is submitted. When I sit down and grade, I like to grade several at once. That way I can make sure I'm doing the same thing consistently. But if you want to go ahead and do those, feel free to, if you like those discussion boards. But that is a common exercise for game development. The members of the team will each come up with a very generic plot, sort of like the prompt in the discussion boards, and then the rest of the team members will describe how that should be made into a game. What's the color palette that's going to be used? What style of music, background music, and sound effects are going to happen? Is it 2D, 3D? What sort of controls are going to be used? Is it the full control where to get the player to do anything, we have to hit a specific button? Is it point and click and animations happen? Is there AI navigation? So we just give our player a general direction to go. The computer figures out where to go, and then all the buttons on the controller are free to do other stuff. That's really useful in role-playing games, because then our buttons are free for all the other stuff we want to do. And we want to break it down into little pieces. So the conflict, build up slowly to a climax. Y'all have encountered stories before, but just think about these. The climax is the main event, the crisis in the story. It's not a long, drawn-out thing. We have several acts we'll want to break a plot down to, and I'm going to make some notes on the board. But 3 main points, and it doesn't look like she put them in order, the same order I would have talked about them in here. So rising, then the climax, and the falling, which is sort of a standard model that we want all of our plots to follow. You can think of it, there's different ways we could say it, but think of it as 3-act version. I'll make a story. Like, act being what we would call it in plays, but there's other ways that we could kind of break down some sort of trilogy. I mostly went with acts because it's quick and easy to write on the board and the notes, if you're following along on the notes. So act 1 is the introductions. So introduce your characters, the plot. Maybe not the plot. Let's take plot off there. The character, the setting. Yeah, all the stuff that's gonna, the pieces. I'll put that in parentheses. We have lots of names for them. The list could get really long if we try to list every single one out, but we want to start by introducing our characters instead, and the setting where those characters are interacting with the world. The second act is the problem, the conflict. The short version of this is put the characters in a terrible situation. What's the worst thing that could happen to the players? And depending on the style of storytelling, these are going to be weighted very differently. In a traditional novel, the introduction, introducing our characters, the setting where they're at, what was in those notes is the rising. Slowly getting into the conflict part. And say a written novel, that's going to be the bulk of it. And then Act 2, the conflict part, is probably going to be shorter. And in the case of a novel, written with shorter words, smaller words as well. In the introduction, you want to use big, complicated words, make them think really hard about everything. And then in the conflict, you want people to read that quicker to help up the pace. But video games would be the opposite. The introduction, introducing our characters in the setting, that's going to happen very, very quickly in a short cutscene. Maybe a practice level, something very, very small, and then most of the gameplay is going to happen here. I'm going to put pins in the climax. We just want to slowly build up. So it's still mostly part of the rising. And then the culmination of that is the highlight of the conflict is the main focal point of the story. 3 is resolution or absolution. I'm going to guess that everybody knows what resolution means. Absolution means to free from guilt. So resolution, everything wraps up nicely. Right? Put it in a package, tie a nice little bow on it. Everything wrapped up fine in the end. The lives happily ever after version of the story. Absolution means to free from guilt. So that would be like the Die Hard movies. It didn't matter how much destruction was caused, right? Buildings blown up. I think in one of the Die Hard movies, he blew up an entire airport. Right, that's probably a $20 billion repair bill. It didn't matter how many other people were hurt along the way. At the end, the terrorists were stopped. That's all that matters. So we absolve Bruce Willis's characters from any guilt that happened. Anything he would have been any guilt that worked in there. Yeah. Tutorial levels are usually for the controllers, but it does. If you want to force people to watch the tutorial level, it's a good idea to introduce your characters there. Use that as part of the storyline instead of just the controls. Resolution and absolution. So obviously, video games. There is often a tendency towards violence in video games, so there's going to be a lot more absolution than resolution, but it happens kind of both ways. And an important part here, resolution or absolution, another way to phrase that is for better or worse. wrap it up quickly. I'm going to underline quickly. That's the important part there at the end. We're already past the interesting point. The most interesting point in the story is going to be the climax. So afterwards, we want to wrap it up quickly. And those notes we were just looking at, that's the fall. And I wrote that very, very generically, right? We introduced these words. We introduce things, put a conflict into those amongst those things we just introduced, and then resolution or absolution. And there's layers and layers of that inside of there. So the introductions in a traditional novel or a movie, they're going to spread out for a little while. I talked about novel last time. Let's talk about movie this time, right? That's the first half hour, 45 minutes of the movie. Bunch of stuff's happening, but it'd be really, really boring if we just introduced the characters one by one, gave their name and where they live at and why they're in the story. So the introduction usually involves, right, each character's introduction involves a small minor conflict that doesn't really lead to the climax of the story, and then a resolution for that small conflict. So act one in a movie might consist of 4 or 5 passes through act 1, 2, and 3. And we do the introduce, conflict, resolve for each of the 10 main characters in the movie. Superhero movies are a great example of that. And once all of those introductions are made, then we bring all those characters together and put them in a bigger conflict. And culminates at some battle at the end. And then afterwards, in the case of superhero movies, there's usually just sitting around telling jokes for 5 minutes at the end and maybe a couple cutscenes so that people sit through the credits, because the credits take forever. But every scene in that movie should involve all 3 of those. And with superhero movies, once we go beyond the movie, then there's like Marvel, there's the phases, right? Each phase, all those movies make up pieces, layers and layers and layers of those 3 things for that overall introduction, conflict, and resolution for that phase of the Marvel movies. And following that, all of the phases together build up introduction, conflict, and resolution. There are lots of examples of stories we can refer to. But I feel it's safe to assume everybody has encountered some stories before. So just think about that, the 3 parts, and everything you do needs to have those 3 parts layer and layer and layer on top of each other. Right? Throughout, you're not just going to introduce your characters at the beginning and then throw them into the gameplay and then do the ending cutscene. You introduce your character in the intro cutscene for your game, or the tutorial, which from looking at the chat, that is a common way to make sure people watch your intro cutscene. People watch the storyline, is put the storyline into the tutorial level. So then they know how to play a little bit and what the story is, so they know what to do whenever they get to the actual level of the conflict. But in that Act 2 portion, which is where all the gameplay is happening, we're still introducing more mobs and NPCs over and over and over again. The conflict on the mobs is obvious, but a lot of the NPCs will introduce new conflicts, even if they're small, right? If you're in a role-playing game and you need to buy better armor, that is a conflict. Right? It doesn't have to be the violent conflict, but something interesting happens. There's just kind of hard to settle on a single word for that. And then at the end, so there's the conflict. Have to go collect more gold coins, come back, and then the resolution is you buy that bigger sword. so that you can beat the next guy, which is the resolution of the intermediate conflict. You can beat the next boss, and afterwards the process repeats. Meet some new NPCs that tell you about the next threat. You have to go collect a bunch more gold, the conflict, resolve that with a better weapon, then you can beat the next boss. And it keeps building and building and building. So those are that 3-part storytelling. You want to come back to that over and over and over again. Traditionally in English classes, those names kind of work nicely, right? The rising, I would have put them in a different order. The rising, the climax, and the falling. So just an ebb and flow over and over again. Think about like waves passing. Avoid this. Then this happened. Then this happened. Then this happened. Right? That's bad in a book. And in video games, it's really, really easy to fall into that track. But we still have the same thing. We want the ebb and flow. We want interesting things to happen and then be resolved over and over and over again. We don't want to just go a level 1 walkthrough, then a level 2 walkthrough, level 3 walkthrough. I guess in our modern world, you could think about like machine learning. Anybody ever watched any of those videos of machines, the AI learning to play games? Some of them are hilarious. There's a Monopoly one that was just one of the funniest I've ever seen. That it would just make random decisions sometimes that were funny. But when they taught an AI or let an AI figure out how to play Mario on its own. Anybody ever seen that video? It jumps the whole way. It just figured out that the best way to do it is do the jump. It just constantly jumps all the way through the level and does a great job at it. But the AI constantly does that same thing. So that is a then this happened, then this happened, then this happened story. Compare that to another video I saw like that is an AI learning to bowl. They created a 3D bowling lane, and then gave it a 3D model, a fully like a ragdoll character model, and then the AI had to figure it. Yeah, that's a great one. Comment in the chat room if you just saw that. Can't predict what I'm going to do if I don't know what I'm going to do. You want the story to feel more like that. It's a lot more interesting, a lot more engaging. It keeps people playing your games for longer. But the ragdoll bowling, the AI had to figure out how to stand up and move the ragdoll and grab a bowling ball and fully bowl completely. So there was some really, really strange things there. It actually never really stood up. It walked like a crab. It ended up walking like a crab and then grabbing the bowling ball with one arm. So like a 3-legged crab, and then set the bowling ball down and kicked it down the lane and kept getting strikes. So that's apparently a good way to bowl. But yeah, there's lots of them. If you just Google like AI learning to play games.
To be fair,
always
4 legs is better than 2 for standing.
Yes, it obviously is, but yeah, some strange. They'll do some strange things. Strange things happened, and they worked out really, really well. So, and it's a way more interesting when the machine isn't going to it. Then this happened. Then this happened. Then this happened. I'm sure y'all have all read stories like that or seen movies like that, and they might be entertaining, right? If that's how the story flows out, right? You don't want to block a story that's flowing out on its own. So sometimes that happens, and then you'll just kind of add in details to get that ebb and flow back in there. But it's a good thing to try to avoid.
And do not forget how the wrap up or falling action or that, because I've seen games that do that, and it's just like you do the thing, and then it's just like, and now the next thing is like, what? But we just what?
Yep. Yes, yes, it's very important. And yeah, humans have been passing advanced knowledge about storytelling on since before we could write stories down. It's uh, creating and enjoying stories is a human trait. So video games are just the latest way to do that. So big ones like that, like Grady just mentioned, that's humans immediately notice if something's wrong with your story. Right?
Yeah, I
It's
just
too
had
ingrained in our instincts. We automatically evaluate every story we hear.
yeah, just a little bit ago, one of the games I played, we spent a whole lot of time getting a character built up so she could deal with this enemy for us and yada yada yada, and she just goes and claps her hands and goes, "It's done." And it's like, okay, like we know you became the most powerful thing because of everything that we just did and yada yada yada, and we know that that reasonably tracks from everything that we know from the story and stuff that that's possible for her to just do that. But then we don't see anything. It's like, okay, and everybody universally agreed that we wanted desperately to see um the cutscene cut to the individual in question and see what the heck actually happened. Like
Yeah, which game was that?
Destiny 2.
Oh, okay. Yes, I've
We
heard
we
I've heard
we
complaints about that one. Yeah, and
yeah.
that one it was obvious. A lot of the complaints revolved around. It became obvious that executives were demanding them to just release the thing.
Oh yeah,
Like
Destiny 2 has a
this
lot
is
of
enough for that
problems.
they'll stop yelling to release it um, if we do this because they wanted to jump on the money before people forgot about Destiny One. It was a sequel, so they had to get it out quickly. And yeah, they didn't properly tell the story. Yeah, live
That was
service
actually a
games in
recent
the
story
chat.
beat, not way back when it was originally made. Actually, point of fact, the Destiny 2 was actually delayed at one point, which they actually handled very well back at that point in time by releasing an extra bit of DLC in the original game to keep everybody tided over. But
Yeah, but
they've,
then when it did come out, it was rushed.
yeah,
Like
yeah, there have been a lot of
they
rush
didn't
things.
finish it.
Yep.
Yeah, there's so many examples of that. We can find that in Hollywood movies as well. Um, I'm sure everybody's seen a couple, but if you have some other thoughts on these where these tie into games that you know, feel free to yeah share them today. Right? That's what we're studying, and um, humans are a social species, right? We interact, even if we're introverts. Um, Being introverted means we don't want to talk to other people. It doesn't mean we don't want to be around other people. We want to be near other people, listening to them talk, just not part of their conversation, not having them ask us questions and stuff. So, but feel free to share. Next one on here, narration POV. As game developers, we have a this is one of the ones we have a huge advantage over. Right, a plot's a plot. We want to pay attention to those three acts. That's how we create the ebb and flow. Um, for narration POV, that's how we uh, that's the first thing we decide when we go to make a game. How are we going to put our graphics? Are we the little box moving around, or are we looking at the little box moving around? Where do we position our camera? Uh, and in games, we can switch between them. When it happens in novels, uh, it seems odd. In movies, it kind of works to switch between that third person view, and every once in a while it'll flash into a first person view, and it's like you're looking out their eyes. But that's a climactic event. So it doesn't have it's very subtly used in movies, but it's incredibly common in video games. In racing games, the player usually gets to choose it themselves. Which view do they prefer? Uh, and this is I like this note that she put in here for the last little bit. That does affect all other elements of the story and how it's told. Right? If you're doing third person view, you can work clues around. You can hide clues in the background for the player to find. But if it's first person, the clues have to be more out in the open, obvious, because you have to be absolute certain that they're going to see them. Um, that you have to be certain that they're going to come across it. So it affects how the ebb and flow of the story is relayed to the character. Do they get in first person? They kind of have to either see it directly or hear it directly from an NPC or mob. As third person, you could work things in uh, subtle things in the background, right? You could have uh, uh, the original Street Fighter game. Anybody ever seen that when it was an arcade? So that's like before Nintendo. It was like 1984, 83. Um, that Double Dragon also did it, and then Double Dragon became both of those became Nintendo games. I think they continued on afterwards. But something that was it was in third person view, and at the very beginning, you'd see the main bosses fighting in the background, and then later you'd see other stuff happening in the background. So you're like there's a story being told there with the bosses moving up along the way. Um, and then all those places they showed up in the background along the way for the game became relevant when you got to the end of the story. Um, I'm sure that hasn't been omitted, but I think that's mostly used for side stories anymore. I can't think of any since like those, yeah, Double Dragon and the original Street Fighter were like predate Nintendo. Uh, but it was a major component of the story that just happened in the background. And you can't really do that in a first person narrative. But in short, we have a huge advantage over uh, writers. Same thing with mood, right? The classic example from an English class that's shown up in a number of memes over the years, right? Uh, the author says there's blue curtains drawn, fluttering in the breeze by the window. They just write those words there, and then people that read the story are supposed to analyze and rearrange and interpret that the author's talking about depression by that, right? Uh, but as game developers, we can actually draw some kind of blue curtains blowing in the breeze on a dark night and have the shadows playing around them and make it look spooky and sad and all of that stuff. Um, we can choose the color palette and the music. So we're not just describing a dark setting. Our character is actually moving through a dark, foggy setting, right? Uh, Silent Hill? Is that the name of it? I started to say it and it didn't sound right. I think Silent Hill, but I might have that name wrong. If it wasn't for the fog or if you had decent lighting in that game, it wouldn't be nearly as much fun, would it? Yeah, yeah. Okay, yeah, those both showed up. Yeah, so Silent Hill, it, a lot of the game, yeah, if you were running around that exact same world without the fog and bright lights, it wouldn't be nearly as much fun. So game developers have a huge advantage over this. Same thing, bright colors, bouncy music. Uh, we can immediately convey that when we narrow down the color palette we're going to use for our game and start picking the soundtrack. Excuse me, and think about how they go together to adjust the mood that the player, the mood of the story. Um, would be pretty good. Yeah, yeah. Most every game would be that. I just Silent Hill is extreme one. We could take some other games that it could go the other way too. Right? Imagine a Mario with one of the Mario games with the dark colors and fog everywhere, so that you couldn't see anything until you were right up on it. And instead of that traditional Mario music, you have something that like the soundtrack from the Halloween movies. That going the whole time to raise suspense, and then suddenly a turtle walks up on you, or a Goomba runs up from the side. It makes a very, very different mood to the game. Characters are obvious who are the main players. With game development, that ties into the narration directly. So I'll leave that there so you can read what is on the screen. How does it influence other things? How's the audience going to be affected by the character? That happens a lot, right? Um, well, in Mario, uh, the difference between the regular turtles, or just the color, right? The green turtles and the red turtles. Just those little things make a difference. The giant bullets versus that are the size of Mario versus the um, little fireballs or something that would hit, right? They're both just as dangerous to the player, but one seems much, much worse than the others.
It also works with friendly NPCs too, right?
Yeah,
How they act or are or like shaped, or their appearance and stuff can really change how players perceive them and what they think of them. One of drawback from Destiny 2, the Forsaken DLC, which is one of the greatest storylines in the game as far as all the players are concerned, featured a storyline of vengeance. There was a character called Cade who was a funny smart aleck who would always be chatting in your ear while you're running through missions. Well, not always, but he was one of the characters that could be like accompanying you over comms, basically talking you through levels. And he
yeah,
was a
yeah,
beloved character, and he got killed during this thing, and that during the story, and the entire story arc was just you hunting down his killer across the entire solar system, trying to hunt him down and kill him, and to get revenge for killing Cade. And it's still to this day regarded as one of the best storylines in the game's 10-year history.
yeah. It's an important aspect, even if you do it subtly. I highlighted that. I knew exactly which one you were going to talk about when we were at this point. What motivates them? What are their goals? What are they after? Right. The whole interaction thing. We want to think about all these things, just like the traditional novelist, right? Typing up a novel. Or even before that, the village storyteller, the village elder sitting around a campfire. Uh, you can't just give a generic story and expect the younger generation to follow, right? Way back in the Stone Age, uh, a 3 to 5 year old still had the attention span of a 3 to 5 year old. And if the only way you have to convey the history of your village is by sitting around a fire telling those kids stories, you better be able to keep their interest to fit in with that attention span of a 3 to 5 year old, which is also going to play into game development as well. Because if you're making a game for kids, you can automatically assume that they're going to have a much shorter attention span. There better be something changed pretty quickly, or they're going to lose interest. Versus adults, that your main audience is like people in their mid-30s that are going to play after they get home from work, probably range like late teens to mid-30s. Those people are going to sit for a little bit longer. They're going to sit through more boring parts of a story, so you can work things in subtly instead of just explosively to keep the little kids' interest. We always have to consider these. Dialogue's probably easier for writers because they just write a paragraph and put quotation marks around it. Then we have the dialogue, throwing uh, emotional adjectives for how they say it or whatever. But interacting with the NPCs or mobs or whatever is in the game, we have to. It's like the laws of physics. We could make new laws. We could make new laws of physics, and as long as we're consistent, it'll work with our game. But the dialogue has to fit the characters we're interacting with and the mood of our story. We can't just give every character the same robotic voice, right? Can't use text to speech and have every NPC sound the same. People are going to stop paying attention to them pretty quickly and lose interest in the game. We actually have to go hire voice models, either a unique voice model for every character, or find one of those, somebody that's a professional voice model and can distinctly do each character and make them sound like a different one. And those people are expensive and hard to find because they're rare. So the people that are good at that, Hollywood tends to find them really, really quick, and that's what they do. And then then it costs a lot of money.
Yeah, one of the big things with writing different versus like video games is with writing, you can directly state what you want the reader to know. You can have their thoughts, you can have they said so in a certain way. With dialogue, you have to with in any sort of cutscene or even them talking to you over a radio or whatever, you have to convey just like how somebody talks. You have to convey everything that you want the character to know about this person via their tone, the way they're saying, the accent, whatever. You have to make all that work together to convey what you want.
Yeah, hand gestures, posture, all the stuff that goes in normal communication has to be there. We have to work that stuff in, or it's going to be missing. We can't just describe it. Yeah, text to speech is good for debugging because then, or just like the final graphics on the animation, it's really, really easy, and it was really hard to invent. But now that it's been invented, it's just as easy as printing the words, printing a string to the screen. We just say
text to speech does in some cases have a good, like, if you're effectively walking around on your own through an abandoned facility with only your AI companion, then yeah, text to speech is what you want to do because your AI companion can just be monotone text to speeching in your ear. But if it's an actual other person, you don't want to do that.
Yeah.
Text to speech can help set the setting even sometimes if it's appropriate.
And like you pointed out, we can't say what the NPC is thinking. It has to be acted out somehow the way it would happen in real life. Setting's an important one, right? That's right up there with narration and characters. We have to actually model all of those things. So kind of hard to say whether that's really an advantage or disadvantage in game development over writing stories, because obviously it's going to take a lot longer and a much bigger team to get the really nice models in place for that entire world. We can't just describe the world. Can't be like Stephen King and say it's in Maine, and enough people who've seen pictures of Maine that's enough to get the whole setting there. People know there's going to be pine trees and lakes and rocky shorelines, and if we want to do that in a game, turn the Stephen King book into a game, we have to actually draw the pine trees and the rocky shorelines and the large foamy waves that you can tell are ice cold just from seeing them. Have to actually put that stuff together. So once it's together, it's going to look better, but we either have to have a bigger team or spend a very, very, very long time doing it. Right? Is it Stardew Valley? Is that the one made by one person?
There are numerous games made by one person.
Yeah, quite a few games have been made by one person. I was trying to think of the biggest one. I think it's Stardew Valley. It might be the other one.
Recently, the video game, what is it called? I'm brain farting on the name. It's become a hit, a great big hit. It's the Lethal Company. There we go, Lethal Company. That was made by one guy, and it is currently one of the most popular games around.
I think it's Stardew Valley. It might The other little farming ones. One of them like that. It was made by one person, but it took 8 years to get the first version out. It takes a very, very, very long time. Yeah, yeah. There's some popular ones out there, but they're usually made by teams. Uh, even even a two-person team gets it through more than twice as quickly. I'm going to send you all this document afterwards, all the things to think about. This is important for game developers. Symbols are going to guide our player. Little hints. Those ones I mentioned earlier, Double Dragon and Street Fighter, and uh, many thousands, uh, many thousands of games that have shown up since then, because those original ones were predated Nintendo, or predated Nintendo in America. But when you got to the end and all the story pieces came together, even the graffiti that was painted on the walls throughout the town made a difference. There was another game I played like that when I was young, so like on the original Nintendo. Oh, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. When that game started out, that also, it was just graffiti would be spray painted randomly in the background, and to consolidate the city look, they recycled buildings. So it was noticeable when a building you'd seen a few times flowed past, and then there was graffiti on there, and it's like, oh, probably need to go inside of this building this time and do some stuff.
Symbols
Clues, hints like that. What's that, Brady?
Symbols don't only need to be like writing or stuff. There can be all manner of symbols, like even
Sound
verbal
effects.
symbols. Because I keep drawing back to Destiny 2. You could call it a symbol of a specific faction. There's these creatures called Ahamkara, and the way they talk to people is they will always call you "Oh blank mine," and like "Oh reader mine," "Oh protector mine," or something along those lines. And so the second you read or hear that, you instantaneously know that you're dealing with one of those shapeshifters, because that's their calling card. That's a symbol of them.
Yeah. Symbols. I thought you were going somewhere else with that, but if you're something like Grand Theft Auto, you're walking around a city and uh, you hear a locational sound that's like an explosion or gunfire, but there's nothing on the screen. Which way should you go in Grand Theft Auto when you hear gunfire that you can't see? Towards it, right?
Probably towards it, depending upon what you're doing.
Yeah, depending on the game. And in Call of Duty, when you hear gunfire you can't see, you should probably go away from it, find cover like a real life situation. But in Grand Theft Auto, when you hear gunfire you can't see, you should probably go towards it. So the symbols, which again, same symbol can be used differently in different games. Yeah. So back in the day, low storage for assets have to recycle and reuse. And I have it in the odds and ends for when we get to week 8. I don't know if we'll have time for it, but we can do procedural stuff these days. We can have dynamically generated buildings, which means we are still essentially recycling the buildings. So instead of having a couple of buildings, we have a couple of materials. We'll say uh, we have, we'll define what the stucco on the buildings look like and the basic idea of the walls. So if we had like brown stucco and then those pointed arch type windows of different sizes and awnings and canopies that were all made of fabric, we're still recycling. It's just recycling pieces of the building so that all of them look different. And then they procedurally do that, and it looks like we're in a street in Algeria or something with those ones I just described. The brown sand stucco and um, striped fabric awnings and things like that. But so we still do a lot of recycling. That way we don't have to draw every single thing. But we can we recycle the components instead of the entire building. The theme is just like a theme, and when we create a new slide deck in PowerPoint, that's the best example I can think of, right? If we go create a new PowerPoint or new file in PowerPoint, start putting a slide deck together, we go with the default one, it's just black letters on white background. That's pretty boring. So we can choose those themes, and the first thing that does is restrict the color palette. It's like, okay, we don't need every possible color. Here's 7 colors to choose from. Maybe a little transparency to get variety on each of those colors, but we restrict it down to the thing that weaves itself throughout the story. The fog and darkness in Silent Hill, right? That tells us we are still in that same world the entire time. The background music on Super Mario Brothers, it tells us no matter what level we're in, without the music terms, the little repeating part. Well, I'll use the minute of the song. That's the technical music term. The main thing that repeats but varies throughout the song. The repeating idea that just varies a little. There's that basic one for Super Mario Brothers, and it doesn't matter if we're in that intro world or one of the water worlds or a desert world. The minute of the song is still the same, and it's varying differently and appropriately for the current level we're in. But it's part of the theme that tells us as soon as we hear that basic the basic idea of that background music that we are still playing a Super Mario Brothers game. It's also themes in the story, the lesson to be learned and stuff. So there's that's used 2 different ways, and it doesn't really seem to be formalized. So just one of those complicated English things. 2 things called a theme, which should really, if I wrote these notes, I would have put theme twice on there. I'd put theme and then theme again as different bullet points instead of just making them plural to accentuate that. But it's used 2 different ways. The moral of the story we're telling is also called the theme of it, as well as like the color palette, the sounds, one of the these words at the end. It's a long list of words tying things together. All of this, for game developers, the subtleties that tie your game together. And then at the end, we want to put a lot of effort into this for the audience, because with writers, they're just going to write the story that comes out of it, and maybe do some editing if it just kind of seemed like it's more appropriate for children. They'll take out the big words, make it easier, drop it from a 10th grade reading level to a 5th grade reading level, or vice versa. They think, oh wait, this story might be better for somebody in their late teens. They'll add in a few more slightly larger vocabulary to increase the age. But for us, we have to kind of take that to the extreme, right? A game designed for adults would have every one of these parts different. And by adults, I mean late teens to video games have been around for a while. So I'm closer to 50 than I am 40. And first time I played video games are older than me. So as old people play video games too. So we do want to focus it in on that. But if you're designing a game for somebody my age, right? Late 40s through the 50s, where arthritis is starting to kick in, or even beyond, right? The original gamers, the people that first got Pong at home, those people are close to retirement age now. So they're probably getting pretty bad arthritis. We wouldn't want to do a fast-paced game where they have to do this, move their fingers as quick as they can for the controls, because that's just going to hurt. They're just going to put the controller down and never play a game again. So we'd probably have like AI navigation meshes so that they just click once and then the character is going to walk for the next 5 minutes and um, make it subtle for them. Whereas late teens, early adults, we're going to keep their fingers moving like this on the controllers as quick as they can, keep them going. Uh, yeah. Uh, Video games cover the entire spread of humanity. And late teens to early adults, it better be very precise controls. The character better do exactly what it's supposed to do the instant they push that button. But if the game's for, say, 3 to 6 year olds, we need to be a lot more forgiving with the controls, right? Some extra button pushes aren't going to kill the player. Being just a little bit late on pushing the button isn't going to affect it, right? And a platformer, if it's late teens, early adults, middle age, that range, we probably give them about that much coyote time at the end of a platform. And if it's a little kid, we'd probably give them like that much coyote time at the end of the platform. So think about that's very important. Is for game developers, we can't go back and edit that stuff like novelists can later. Like, actually, this story would be better for a preteen than a late teen. So let's go take out all the big vocabulary words, make it easier to read, drop the reading level. That's really hard to, we can't edit a game afterwards. So we kind of have to work all of that stuff in from the beginning. That's the notes I have. That's the notes I borrowed from the creative writing teacher because I really wanted to accentuate that point that we're not doing something new. Video games are just the new way to tell a story. But storytelling is as old as humanity, maybe older, depending on where you want to draw lines and definitions. So the other thing, there's all those little aspects we want to think about the whole time. And in general, as I was talking about those, let's talk about when the story just flows freely, right? That story that's been in the back of your mind um, for years and years and years, and you finally have an outlet for it, and you start putting the game together, and then the stories, all those details that have been rattling around in your brain for years are flowing out quicker than you can keep up with them. When that happens, you don't want to stand in the way. But if you're thinking about game development serious, right? Even if it's your side thing, right? You come home from your long hours of your day job, and that's what you do for fun in the evening is you develop games and then throw them out on Steam for free, or maybe take donations or even $1, right? Just because you find it fun to make games, you want to keep a steady flow going with that. And sometimes, well, there's always ebbs and flows to things. There's always an ebb and flow. So sometimes you're going to be more creative than others. And what do you do when the story isn't flowing out so nicely? So those years that I was trying to do the novelist thing, the method I came up with was I would break it down. To force stuff out, I would just open a blank document and approach it like I was writing a season of a TV show, or actually half a season. I always went with 11 things. So I'm just going to do this in a document. So this is what I would do. I'd create a new document, and then I would start listing things out. So we'd have the setting, the characters, than the episodes. And I would just start letting it flow together like this. So I would always do 11. One. So I would just do something like that to make sure and I'd start writing 11 episodes. So setting, just force something, maybe a sci-fi thing, uh, um, cargo, not soldiers, and I'm just making this up right now. Cargo, not soldiers. Some other stuff's going to go in there, right? This isn't the final draft. It doesn't have to look that nice. So we got a captain. I don't know the name. I'm just going to call it Captain Smith. But as I was writing captain right there, I'm going to put dot, 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 because I didn't finish the captain's name. Thought of the important ones. So like the important characters are like a couple of small people on the ship smuggling stuff along the way. So the main characters in our story are these smugglers that just got jobs as like the cook and cook, custodial, maintenance, maybe someone's administrative assistant, and give all these people names, right? Give them names as they come along, and then just start writing the things. So and so right, Star Trek, Star Wars, they're always about the main officers there on the bridge and stuff, right? Let's make this story about low-ranking people on the ship. Doing side things to try and get rich or something. Rich quick. I'm gonna quit. I'm gonna stop typing that, fixing typos. This is just forcing an idea out, just little bits along the way, and then start writing an episode. So we have a 3-part story, right? There's an act one, act two, and act three. So here, we'll start with cook preparing breakfast for crew. Introduce others as they come in. And it doesn't necessarily have to go in order, right? It's just a little template to start filling out and try to force an idea out for a story. This is what I would always do it like this. And I would think about a TV show as I was doing it. Once something started coming together, I'd start thinking about a TV show. Wouldn't even have to go in order. Maybe down here is the standard time loop episode. Use the time loop to rob a bank or something. Instead of the traditional captain and engineers do something fancy to escape a time loop in the sci-fi story, right? It's like, oh, hey, this is a great chance to scope out this bank or this jewelry store that has a whole bunch of things and keep track of where all the security is on the space station at a particular time, and use it differently, and just kind of fill all these things out. Right down here, nearly get arrested, kicked off the ship, be Act 1, and then like for Act 2, struggles in some local city, and for the Act 3, the resolution, managed to convince captain to let them back in crew. Is that enough of an example to kind of see where that's going? I'm just forcing the idea out, right? None of this is permanent. And I would always go with 11, which would be about half a season. And as this template fills in, really, just more and more details get added until a story starts to come together. And then if it's going to be scripts for a TV show, that can quickly be extended. Each one of those episodes is spelled out. Start writing the dialogue for each one. Right? Could do that right here. I don't know, maybe one of the cooks named Bob. So cook named Bob. Needs somebody to talk to. Sally, the captain, no, custodian. Custodial, like room service in a hotel. So not a military ship. It's more like a hotel where there's the one person that comes around every day and collects all the linens and gets those washed, and then that way there's clean towels and sheets and stuff every day in everybody's room. Call her Sally, and then we could just start writing out a script from there. Obviously, as she comes in there, just throw in some words, going somewhere. Maybe it's going nowhere, get edited later. Something very interesting happened this morning. We should talk after you're done serving. Right, not the final draft, just enough to get the idea down. This is what I found worked out really, really well for me. I managed to turn that into, whenever I couldn't think of something, I would do this. And I would picture in my head, like, imagine watching this TV show and throwing the pieces together to get the first. Well, I always put 11 episodes in the template, which is half of a season, but 11 episodes could quickly be turned into 11 chapters of a book. Right? No trouble to get 11 chapters of a book or 11 scenes in a movie, and then add more and remove more later, because by the time the template's filled out, you probably have a pretty good story going. That's my tips for those times that the story is not coming easy. If the story's coming out easy, you don't want to stop it, right? Just do everything you can to keep up with your creativity. But other times, especially if you're working as a game developer, right, you need to come up with those stories. You have to come up with something, and that's what I found worked really, really well for a story. And yeah, those 11 things that I was visualizing as episodes of a TV show. Each one have that act 1, 2, and 3 again, layers and layers of that. Just focus on those things. What gets introduced? What's the conflict? Did y'all notice I kind of worked that in there already? So that's that'd be like scene 1. They do this, then they do more stuff. Then scene 2. So introduction, something interesting happened. There's the conflict, for lack of a better term. There's probably better words that we could put on that. And oh, bring that over. And then this would be, oh, I lost my place in the outline. And then scene 2 is the resolution. In some random quarters, Sally changed linens. So she's got an armload of covers, sheets, and towels as Bob comes down the hall. Just to accentuate that. So there's all three, there's a pass through all three of the acts. Introduce those characters. Conflict very mild here. Something interesting happened, but she's getting her breakfast and he's busy serving everybody on the ship breakfast. So a very mild conflict, but then later there's a resolution to that conflict. And then just layers and layers and layers of that, focusing on that particular thing, that ebb and flow of how a story is told, and then those keywords that we looked at from those English lessons. That's my tip for storytelling when you just have to force things out. Anybody have any questions about that? All right, I assume the silence means no questions. So again, there's going to be a short quiz that's basically going to be based off that lecture that we just gave. Make sure that confirm, right, those major course learning objectives, we have to cover all those and confirm that they're learned. So when there's not a good book or so much stuff to go into, there's we're limited on options. So probably just a short quiz. It might be a little bit shorter than normal. I'll write something later today or in the morning to get some questions about storytelling out there. But for now, it's probably a good time for a break. I know I'm kind of thirsty and I forgot to make coffee before class, so go grab a sip of water or something. Does 10 minutes sound good? All right, so my laptop says 2:19. After that, we'll do stuff in Godot. See about changing scenes. That way you can work cut scenes into your game and actually apply storytelling, which for our class and the time constraints, you don't need to do animatable cutscenes. You can just do like a written paragraph to introduce the story or to resolve or absolve the story at the end. Just a written paragraph cutscene will be enough for our class due to time constraints, but putting an animation there, it would be exactly the same. And then as long as we switch between them, and then we'll look at signals. So I'll see y'all in just a few minutes. I'm gonna go grab a drink of water.